The Paris Agreement was an historical agreement. It was the first legally binding and universal global agreement on climate change that was adopted last year in Paris. And last year, Cornell had a small delegation to COP21, and it was very exciting to see that finally signed after 2 weeks. And it was great to be there during that event. So this year, it's equally exciting to go back to COP22. This year, we're taking 5 students from Cornell University. They're going to be helping us participate with side events that we're holding. They're going to be talking about their research at our Cornell exhibit and meeting with parties and attending the delegations and the negotiations. So for me personally, I'm really interested in attending the negotiations and observing them. And COP22 in Marrakesh is going to be really important because the Paris Agreement just entered into force on November 4th, 2016. And so now we're at the point where all of the countries that signed on to the agreement now have to start implementing. So there's a couple of key issues that are going to be discussed, including loss and damage, mitigation, and displacement. And now countries before Paris, they were expected to submit their intended nationally determined contributions of how each country was going to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. This year they're going to Marrakesh with their nationally determined contributions. And there's going to be ongoing negotiation about how all of those countries can scale up that ambition and those commitments so that as a global community we can keep greenhouse gas emissions and global warming below 2 degrees Celsius.
I hope COP22 actually will give us better directions in terms of resilience. Global climate change is happening, whether we like it or not. But the question is rising over here, how we can live with it and how we can make the best of the situation in order to sustain the environment for coming future and future generations.
I hope that nations will be inspired by the initiatives of one another to take action to reduce the impacts of climate change. And I also hope that new strategies for climate adaptation will be exchanged to better position cities and communities towards social ecological resilience.
My hope for COP22 is that the opportunities that soils afford to sequester carbon will get more prominence in the negotiations, and that the Paris Accord will be modified so that soil carbon will be recognized as an important and the most important carbon stock in the terrestrial environment. Which means also there's huge opportunities not only to store carbon but also to improve our soils. That improves climate change adaptation, because soils and soil carbon is so important for controlling soil fertility and crop productivity to feed the world.
The only context that ideas like solar geoengineering should be considered is as one element in an overall portfolio of options for managing climate risk. And so what I'm hoping at COP22 is to learn more about people's concerns and sort of how to approach this subject in a way that ensures that it doesn't wind up being an excuse not to mitigate. And it's not clear to me that ignoring the option and sort of pretending it doesn't exist is the best way to reach that outcome.
What we're hoping for in Morocco or from COP22 is that many of these land-based food security intervention efforts are usually hampered by lack of resources. However, where we see an opportunity is that there is a great potential for this mitigation and adaptation, and also creating ecosystem services and benefits. And we are hoping that COP22 will come up with policy measures where climate finance, future climate financing opportunities will consider such initiatives which are life-saving, but at the same time also have a role to create ecosystem services and benefits, and also contribute for climate change mitigation and adaptation. So that's exactly where we see policies along considering above and below ground carbon, soil carbon and biomass carbon measurements, policies along streamlining the process, and policies along more judicious and carbon financing scheme where these things can be taken for sustainability, where societies can be, or communities can be incentivized to enhance sustainability and scaling up of this land-based food security interventions for the well-being of the society and the environment as a whole.
What I hope it accomplishes, and it's always we always hold out big hopes for these kinds of meetings, but in fact, what we really want to look for is continued incremental progress. And so what I'm hoping is that we can continue to make progress towards the achievement of an a solid international regime that reduces greenhouse gases and addresses the issues of climate change as they affect the environment across the board. So I'm really just hoping for continued incremental progress. I wish I could say, there's going to be a big change coming out of this. I'm just glad it's happening, and I think that in itself is a victory.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.